today's webinar. Today's webinar is entitled An Insider's View on Cyberattack Planning and Response. My name is Sal Gilberto. I'm a marketing manager here at Everbridge. I will be your moderator. Very shortly, you will hear from a great panel of experts. Terry Stevenson from Global NSA you'll hear from. You also hear from Carter Schoenberg, who works at Caliber. You also will hear from Imad Moleen, who's the CTO at Everbridge. Many of you are probably familiar with Imad. So I want to talk a little bit about our agenda. So we're going to do an intro. This is part of the intro. You'll then hear from Terry Stevenson talking about cybersecurity, the good, the bad, and the costly. Imad will then come on and talk about cyber attack communication and response. After the session, we have a couple of different resources and offers that we're going to leave up for you to be able to access, and then we'll have a Q&A session. I'll go over the Q&A session in a second. So a couple of housekeeping items before we dive right into the content. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar. The best way to submit your questions is through the GoToWebinar Q&A area. So go ahead and submit those at any point. I will be compiling them throughout the webinar, and then we'll save questions until the end, and all of our speakers will be available for Q&A. If you want to discuss this on Twitter and keep the conversation going both during and after, we're using hashtag Everbridge and cybersecurity. Another housekeeping item that I did want to talk about, this question comes up often, so you'll probably hear me repeat it again at the end, but we are recording today's session. So today's session will be available on the Everbridge website. The recording will probably go up maybe tomorrow, but it might take until early next week for us to process it and get it up on the site. We will also make the slides available. So if you're looking for either of those or both of those, we will put those together, and we will email you the location on where you can find those resources. So I want to talk a little bit about our speakers. I want to introduce our speakers to an insider's view on cyber attack planning and response. So first, I want to introduce Terry Stevenson from Global NSA. Terry, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Do you want to talk a little bit about what Global NSA does?
Yeah, that would be great. Global NSA is a security consulting firm that specializes in various amounts of security solutions. We will come in and evaluate your system. We will put you in place. We provide actual hacking, pen testing, what have you. We do risk analysis. We provide we provide leadership where we'll come in and guide you from an executive level on how to get the dollars you need to put the appropriate security initiatives in place to put you in the place where you need to be. We cover health care, financial PCI, military, a vast level of different services.
Awesome, awesome. And we also have on the line Carter Schoenberg. Carter, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And so you're from Caliber. Do you want to talk a little bit about what Caliber does?
Absolutely. Caliber is a professional services and technology consulting firm. The directorate that I'm responsible for provides professional cybersecurity services to both government and enterprise. We specialize in working with our customers to better understand what threats exist, how we translate these threats into business risk for them, and that ultimately allows them to make recommendations that are business and cost justified.
Well, welcome to the webinar. And we also have Imad Moleen. Imad, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
And many of you are probably familiar with Imad. He is a regular contributor to our Everbridge webinars.
Yep, and hoping that people aren't too tired of hearing my voice, but as some of you may know, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the company, and I'm responsible for the overall product and technology direction. So I often hear from some of you who already are customers with requests for enhancements and new things, and hopefully you'll keep them coming.
Great, great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and shift it over to Terry. So Terry, let's talk cybersecurity, the good, the bad, and the costly.
Great, thanks. So good morning, everybody, or I guess in some cases, good afternoon. How are you? You want to get? They've already seen us, so let's go to the next slide. Today I'm going to talk to you about what is your mindset. Are you prepared? Do you realize you're going to be hacked? What is your confidence level? When you're hacked, what do you do? And how do you respond to a breach? Next slide. One of the things is important in understanding is how are you approaching your risk level, your threat level? Are you taking the approach of, it won't happen to me? From my experience, in almost 30 years in this industry, I have found you will be hacked. And what happens prior to, what you do to prepare, and what you do during, and what you do immediately thereafter makes all the difference for your brand, the damages, and how to best eliminate the threat in your environment. A lot of companies feel that since they're compliant, they've got their PCI certification. Everyone knows that PCI 3.0 just came into effect. Their meaningful use, or aka HIPAA. They've even are for state and government. They've passed FISMA and some other things. That may not be enough. And what we're finding with the courts and things, that even though you are compliant, you are certified as compliant, you've had a third party certify you, it's not sufficient to protect you from damages. There's cases right now being litigated with big organizations, and judges have come out and say it's irrelevant. It just matters to see what you did before you were attacked, what you did during the attack, and what you did after the attack that matters. Most people don't know this, but there's a pattern with these attacks. The pattern is they're going to do all this reconnaissance type work. They're going to get to know your business. They're going to look at Facebook. They're going to look at LinkedIn. They're going to look at your employees. They're going to look at Twitter feeds. They're going to look at your websites. They're going to send phishing emails. They're going to crack SSL. They're going to somehow get legitimate credentials. When they get these legitimate credentials of your employees, then they get in. And that's where they can start to do serious damage. How do you defend against an employee clicking on a phishing email? When it comes to them from it looks like it comes from somebody they know, even in your own company, because they've spoofed your domain. How do you defend against that? How do you keep up with all the moving things? There's 500 viruses put on the internet daily on average. How do you keep up with all these threats and attacks? Well, what you have to prepare to is know that you are going to be attacked. Once these bad guys get into your environment, they're going to elevate their privileges, go get your admin credentials, start creating valid accounts, backdoors, so you won't even know they're in your environment. They will gather intel. They will do it slowly, not to trigger your IDS alerts, not to let your SIMs. How many people out there don't have a SIM? How many people out there don't have their logs configured properly so that they even know that's going on? How do you detect from a legitimate administrative credentials that something's going on? Well, that goes into user behavior to give you some insights, and that's a whole another conversation. But you're going to be attacked, and what to do is what layers can you put in place and how to communicate this. One of the things that was brought out in a lot of these attacks is that individuals, these attackers, were in some of these environments. I think one of them was recorded up to 40 and 4 organization. They were able to read their emails, take their databases slowly, capture all kinds of traffic. They were able to get PII, PCI, all kinds of information. You know, one was in healthcare. One of the big attacks recently occurred was because a CEO had read a phishing email from somebody that he knew, and that's how they got in that way. And who's had this? I always ask my clients, how many CEOs are fired when this happens? How many CIOs are fired and how many CISOs are fired when there's a major breach like this? What do? Well, you need to be prepared. You need to prepare for yourself that you are going to be attacked. Next slide. So when you're thinking about this and you're evaluating, and how do you know that you won't be breached? Do you conduct independent audits? One of the services I was talking a little bit about is we come out, we'll audit, we'll do We'll do assessments of your environment regardless of the data you're trying to protect. We'll hack, we'll pen test, we'll vulnerability scan. But it's more than that. We'll look at policies, but we'll also look at behavior. A lot of people set up equipment, set up detecting, but are you looking for the right stuff? How are you communicating? Systems have to be evaluated. So to be customized for your environment to see what is not behaving, behaving abnormally. What you're looking for is abnormal behavior because these guys are going to get in and they're going to get legitimate credentials. So how do you do this? Get third-party people in to test, evaluate your environment. Hack your system, your live system. Ensure you're certified and compliant because that will help legally. Control the flow of information to your clients through your legal team. These things are incredible, are very important and incredible things to do that everyone's doing, but it's still not enough. You still have to plan on being breached. So you've got your certifications, you've got an IDSs everywhere, you've got layered firewalls, you've got privilege management systems, we've got, a litany of all these little security tools we can put everywhere, and you still get hacked. Then what do you do? How do you kind of prepare for that? Well, everyone does tabletop exercises. Well, how do you do it? Do you do it via email? Do you do it in person? Do you do it with people all over the world? How many people are involved in these exercises? How quickly can you respond to an actual breach? And what happens if the attacker is in your environment and you're using the same tools to communicate this tabletop exercise? Another thing that's important, what are reasonably commercial steps that you need to do to protect yourself? What is the best thing you can do as a business owner? We all know that security costs money, and we have to balance. And a lot of companies are like, well, we're just going to assume the risk. And I've heard this a lot of times. And then they get attacked, and they're like, oh, look at us. Now it's costing millions and billions of dollars, and people are losing jobs. And when, security is going to cost money, but you've got to be smart about it. There's things that you can do to help your legal team to show that you did. You prepare that you're going to attack. You show those steps. You communicate. You get certified. Get NIST certified. Make sure all your stuff meets NIST compliancy because that's reasonable. And the most important thing is communicate to the right people and control that communication. And whatever you do, you've got to ensure that the attacker does not get that communication. Next slide, please. So you've been hacked. Everybody's freaking out. It's constant chaos. What is the first thing that you do? You have let's say you have a SOC set up, and somebody has an alert and it keeps going. They escalate it to a security architect. Then that gets escalated to the security officer. How quickly are you responding to that? Who do you engage from the onset if you suspect this breach could be wider than just some small piece of attack? And how do you know? One, by being prepared and having things assessed prior to and getting things in place and doing behavioral analysis, you can tell that you've been attacked. That's why these Mandiant and other companies are able to go back in time and figure out when, or a good idea when these attacks occurred and how they did the attacks. But do you contact your legal team on the onset? I would. I would have a legal team on part of the tabletop exercise. I'd have one of the attorneys because you need to know, as security professionals, we're not going to be the ones in court defending our company when we're breached. So we need to rely on their judgment on when to send the information, how to send the information, and package the information. When do you tell your customers? Customers, by law, are required to be notified, whether it's consumers, whether it's businesses, depends on what law. Are we talking HIPAA? Are we talking PCI? Are we talking PII? SOX, GBLA, there's always layers of notification requirements. That's why it's really important to have your attorneys involved so you follow the law. The one thing you don't want to do, as some of these companies are being accused of, is not notifying like you're legally obligated to do, or responsibly notifying. So you may want to notify sooner. There's no reason you can't. But remember, it's your brand, it's your reputation that you're trying to protect as well, and the integrity with your clients. Law enforcement. Law enforcement is critical, but there's concerns with law enforcement. When do you engage law enforcement? If this is just a small attack, do we engage them right away? Remember, law enforcement, if they're going to get involved, whether it's the FBI, local law enforcement, usually FBI would handle more of these type of things. When do you involve them? Do you set up a communication with them prior? I do know that the FBI is contacting larger organizations and trying to communicate with them, but you also have to be careful, because anything you disclose with them, they don't need with a subpoena. And that means anybody else that you're in litigation with, if you're sued civilly, can get access to that information. So run it through your attorneys. But law enforcement, involving law enforcement early on may also save your brand, show that you took reasonable, diligent steps. Another big, important question that people can't answer is they'll get breach and they'll say, no, the attacker's not in the environment. How do you know the attacker's not in your environment? They've created how many users? They're using legitimate administrative credentials. Organizations that are worldwide that have hundreds and thousands of users, and how many administrative users on their admins and administrative credentials on their servers. Change them all, but they can leave a back door in your environment where they can go back, be on their timer, sleep, then go back, and then get back in and still be in your environment. How do you know that they've left? You've got to get an outside company in to assess. Another critical piece is one of the things that has been brought out a lot this year is that when the attackers get into your environment, they are monitoring your email. They are monitoring your linked messages. They are monitoring your communications. So it is real critical to have, when responding to a breach, some sort of separate, isolated communications. And that's not logically separated. That is separate communications whereby you can talk with your team members and get what you need going, get the proper messages out, the proper instructions out, have people do what they're supposed to do, and protect the confidentiality and the integrity of the company. Because as you're trying to mitigate, and they're in your environment watching your link messages and reading your emails, they know what you're doing, so they want to go around it. So next slide, please. So you've established you're going to get breached, you evaluated the threat, you bring people in, do your best, what is reasonably, commercial reasonably, or whatever's required for local law enforcement, what have you. And we've done what we can. We got the right things in place. We got the right people. We also, have companies that, if we are breached, can jump at a moment's notice to come in and assist to clear this damage. When you're in the heat of this battle, you need to make sure that everybody, the priorities, everything is agreed upon. One of the things that happens when there's a crisis is you'll have your IT department over here, you have your CEO over here, COO over here, HR here, public relations here, attorneys over here. They're not in agreement. You have infighting. And you need to resolve those priorities prior to being breached. You need to have things documented. You need to have agreed upon process, procedure. What are we going to do? We need to respond smart. We need to be smart objectives on how we respond to these breaches. People don't understand that, and this is what I share with my clients. You hear about the ones in the media. Think about all the ones you don't hear about. Think about it. If you're a company and you've been breached, is the first thing you're going to do is put it out on the media? I wouldn't. I want to know what is going on first and control that flow of information to protect my brand. So one of the ways to accomplish that, to have people not leaking information, to have a process to control damage, is by having everybody, all the stakeholders, an agreement, a plan, a process, and you follow it. It's very critical. Remember, what you do during the crisis can cause far more damage than what you do after or before. During that crisis, it can cost millions on how you respond. The goal is, on any of these attacks, there are three things that you want to try to accomplish. You want to mitigate. I want to eliminate the threat. I want to then, after I've mitigated the threat, the next thing I want to do is, how do I control the damage for any further damage and also ensure that the attacker is gone? How do I control damage to my brand? How do I control damage with my clients? How do I handle this? You also want to control the chain of custody of evidence. So that's a whole other conversation, but what is really critical to those things is the most important piece is communication. If you cannot freely communicate, you're not going to be able to mitigate this properly, eliminate the threat, and then have a reoccurrence of the threat. And what is really scary is when I found out one company had these attackers, it was a group out of China, 4 years in their environment. I want everyone to think about that. How would you respond to the board of directors that we had an attacker in our environment for 4 years? Next slide. So I think, in summation, the critical message that I was trying to convey with this short webinar, and we can always expand to, because there's a lot of subject areas that filter into this, but the biggest key I want to convey is you need to prepare that you're going to be attacked. You're going to be hacked. And what you do before, what you do during the crisis, and what you do immediately thereof, it's going to make the difference for your survival. And remember, the number one thing is communication. Sal?
Great. Thank you so much, Terry. That was very informative. At this point, I know that we have a Q&A coming up, so I want to pass the presentation over to Ahmad.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Terry. Just a reminder to some of you who joined us late to please use the question and answer box in the GoToWebinar sidebar, and please get started with your questions, and Sal will be looking at them and aggregating them towards the end. So I just wanted to take the overall handoff from Terry and really stress one particular point, which is you have to have a plan. And the plan isn't just for if we get attacked, it's when we get attacked. Chances are you will get attacked. And what comes next is what's going to be important. I was actually in a conversation earlier this morning with the head of information security at a financial institution, and I asked him how all of these attacks that are in the news right now, have they changed his perception, his stance, his preparations? And he said, we've always been prepared for everything. But the impact that it has had, the change in their preparation, has had to do with where their investment is going. They're investing not just in prevention, but in incident response. They've expanded the amount of money they're investing in all of this. But a lot more now is going into the incident response part as opposed to simply just the prevention, because they are expecting to get hacked, to get attacked, and for some of those attacks to have various degrees of success. So again, I go back and ask, do you have a plan? What does that plan look like? Do you have a plan to communicate with all the appropriate stakeholders? Do you know, depending on the attack, what it is that you will have to deal with? Do you know how to bring on board your IT security if it's important, your critical incident response team, your executive team, legal, potentially if you're dealing with consumers, customer service? How is your marketing team going to respond? What about your customers? At what point are you going to tell them and what information you're going to share with them? What about your employees? Are you going to make up all of these tasks after you get attacked, or will you have a plan beforehand on how to address them all? I think the answer should be pretty self-evident at this point. So have a plan ahead of time. Have a plan for all stakeholders. So it'll be an interesting matrix. Any type of attack, all stakeholders for every type of attack, but also, just as importantly, for every phase. You know, we've purposely used the exact same diagram that we use time and time again when we talk about having a plan for every phase of an incident. And that does not change when you're dealing with a cyber attack. Because as part of communicating to all the appropriate stakeholders, you have to have in your initial plans exactly how you will deal with every single phase up until the time that you're completely recovered from this particular crisis. That has to be done ahead of time for you to be able to get ahead and have a successful mitigation strategy. So have a truly independent communication system. So this is what's been certainly reported through the Associated Press and ABC News a little while back about the Sony attack, that ultimately they were without any means of communicating internally. And Terry mentioned this before, which is one of the most important things is to communicate. So what happens if you have all these plans but you have no means of communication? Because those means of communication have been compromised. I mean, if an attacker has been living in your system for 4 years, as Terry mentioned, should they be part of that communication system? Should they be seeing what it is that you're planning, even if you're able to establish communications? You know, in this case, you know, part of what was in the news is the fact that they had some people at the very least on an external independent critical communication system. And then they used initially town hall meetings and other meetings in order to get more people onto the system and at least disseminate the information that needed to be disseminated. So the idea behind having a truly independent critical communication system is so that you can deal with the typical emergency issues, but at the same time ensuring that the critical communications that happen to be more operational in nature can piggyback on that existing system, all the way to completely secure communications. It needs to be external, it needs to be redundant, obviously it needs to be reliable, but more importantly it needs to be secure. Because if your internal communication systems are compromised, which chances are they will be, for an attack to be successful, that's one of the areas that these attackers are going to go after, either by making sure that you cannot communicate internally or that all the communications are compromised so they can see what's going on to make the attack even more severe. So what happened, though, is even if an external system is in use, you want to make sure that it is in use by all the appropriate stakeholders. So this was, again, from the interview from the CEO of Sony, who said that while most of the employees were already on the Everbridge system and therefore could communicate appropriately, not everybody was. So they set up a bunch of different workers to recruit the rest of the employees to put them on the system so they could communicate outside of the system that was already compromised. Again, it's not often that we hear this being said in the public domain, but he said that if he had to do it again, he would have made it mandatory to already be on the Everbridge system for every single employee to make it easier in case of a crisis like this to disseminate the appropriate information in a secure manner to all of the people that he needs to communicate with. So how do you do that? Part of the issue is, once you have a system, is to ensure that people are on it. So depending on the type of industry that you're in, it's sometimes hard to say, well, just do it. Just do it. Just put everybody on the system. Just sign everybody up. Make sure that they give up all the appropriate information so you have an alternate system for communicating with them. Use your emergency notification system if need be, if it is built to deal with these more operational items. And I know it's not that easy. So include the sign-up as part of your performance reviews, as part of these town halls, as part of your benefits fairs. Make sure that as one of the checkbox items that they have as part of an employee list, for example, is to make sure that their information is in your Everbridge system or other notification system. You have plenty of opportunities to interact with all your stakeholders. Ensure that you take those opportunities in order to get the information that's necessary to actually sign them up. Build the critical communications awareness, and whether that's by holding regular practices or drills. And again, you've heard me say this before outside of just cybersecurity, but it's great to have a system in place. If you don't use it, you may as well not have it. And using it means having the appropriate employee data in it in terms of how to contact people, but it's also the fact that people will know how to use it. You don't want to be looking for your username and password because you last used it a year ago in the midst of a crisis. Make sure that people know how to use the system, that people are sensitized, and more importantly, as I mentioned this before, by holding regular practices, regular drills, you will ensure that all the data you have in your system is correct and is up to date, that somebody hasn't changed their phone number and their email and all of a sudden they're not reachable. The drills are absolutely key. That builds up the awareness from the employee population, and that also ensures that your data is as high quality as it needs to be. So one way of doing that is to expand the use of the system outside of just emergency management or business continuity into more operational needs and roles. Anything that happens to be critical in nature. And by having that more frequent, more operational use, again, you can achieve some of the same results as you would with frequent drills or practices. Meaning people will know how to use the system, recipients will be sensitized to the critical nature of the communications that they're receiving, and you will ensure that the data, at least the data relating to the contact information, is correct and up to date, so that you're not seeing issues when you need it the most, when it is a true emergency and you're relying on the system as the primary communication system because yours have been compromised. And ultimately, enrich the profiles. The more information you have, the better. You may be relying on a day-to-day basis on an internal portal. You might be relying on an internal HR database to contain contact information and maybe certifications, etc. But again, remember that in case of attack, you may not be able to access those systems, or they may be compromised in other ways that you may not want to leverage them. So enrich the contact profiles in your Everbridge system. It is capable of holding a huge number of different pieces of information about every single contact. Ways of contacting the person, mobile phones, landlines at home, at work, primary, secondary, tertiary, emails. Get as much information as you can about the contacts and make sure that they're kept up to date through the drills that we talked about. Ensure that any additional information that will help you get to the right people at the right time is also in there. Certifications, skills, and in some cases, special needs as well. But create the appropriate fields within your Everbridge profiles and make sure that they're kept up to date. Take it to the next level with things like scheduling information. Who's working when? What shift? Who's the person record for an escalation for a particular function? Have all that information in the system as much as possible, because you don't want where you have a crisis and you wish you had that information. Your system is capable of handling it all. Put that information in there. Anything that has to do with location. Where are people located? Where do they live? Where do they work? If you need to be able to get an IT person who is your networking guru, but who happens to live within a mile of the data center, could you do that today? Why not simply put that information in your Everbridge system? And you can simply ask it, send a request for help to all people who know network security and happen to live within a mile of the data center and happen to not be on vacation. And if you don't hear from them within 5 minutes, escalate to this next group. You can do all of that. But the primary thing is to enrich those contact profiles with as much information as you have in order to allow you to work and execute on these plans. Next is to optimize your cyber attack response and delivery. You've heard us say this before, but you always need to use a multimodal approach. When you're trying to reach somebody, you never know what systems will be up and what systems will be down. But one thing that we haven't talked about too much before is also to realize that there are different levels of security based on which modality or path or delivery method you're going to be using. Again, the reason for using multiple modalities is because you don't know which ones will be up, which ones will be down, which ones will be available to the recipient, and which one will not be. And ultimately, you're chasing somebody down until they actually respond. Right? We've talked about this on multiple occasions before. It remains true today. And obviously, you'll be able to control the fact that if you think that your email system that's internal is compromised, you'll simply deselect that and use only the external email. And by having as many paths as possible, you'll ensure that you have a higher chance of getting to that recipient. But you also want to be careful about what information you're actually sharing over what channel. At some point in time, you might think about if information is really confidential, how are you going to deal with that? Especially if you suspect that your internal email may have been compromised. So think about using, certainly we have a secure communications capability that uses mobile applications on mobile devices to have complete end-to-end encryption of all the content that's being sent, including encrypted voice, encrypted video, encrypted texts, attachments, etc. So be aware of what you're saying over what channels, and ultimately to take both the multimodal aspect of it as well as the security into account. And the key is always to be able to target the individual. I want to get to a person. You're not necessarily targeting a device. I want to get to a person, ensure that they know that they're being summoned to come help with a situation, or letting them know simply what's going on if they're an employee wondering whether to come into the office tomorrow or how to respond to media, beating down their door, or their friends and family wondering whether they'll have a job tomorrow. Let them know, get the acknowledgement that they've actually seen the message or that they've responded if it's a multiple choice question. Get all that reporting in place as quickly, as easily as possible. Next, this is really a bit of a repeat of the idea behind planning for all stakeholders and for all fields. But this bears repeating, which is to proactively communicate to customers and partners. As soon as the information gets out, you want to be in control of whatever information it is as much as possible in those cases. You don't want to be radio silent if people already know that there is an issue. Let your employees know what's going on and how to respond. Let your customers know and be ready to communicate with them appropriately. Again, you can certainly leverage the exact same system to send out secure communications to your customers, to your partners, across your entire supply chain if need be. And do it, again, at every stage. Staying mum and not saying anything will only fuel speculation and rumors and make people uneasy. That's not what you want. In some cases, even if you don't have any additional information to add, a communication might go a long way in terms of letting people know that you're working on it, that you've got the situation under control. So if the information is already out there, take control of the message. And again, just like we said before, in a variety of different crises, even if you don't know if the situation hasn't changed, let people know. Give them a sign of life. So, to recap, this is not very complicated. Plan for when will be attacked, not just if. Plan for how you're going to communicate with every single stakeholder. And for every single phase, not just the fact that you've discovered that there is an issue, but just like every crisis, there'll be multiple phases, all the way through and including the overall recovery. Plan for what you're going to say before an issue like this ever happens. Plan for who you're going to involve long before that. Then have an independent communications system. Have one, and again, if you already have your Everbridge, make sure that you use it for that. Not just for the emergency side of things, but all the way to your secure communications side. But for it to be effective, you have to use it. You have to use it. In order to use it, you have to have the right information about all the appropriate stakeholders in the system. You have to have it in such a way that it's enriched, that it's got all the appropriate information for you to be able to do your job once the crisis actually hits. The richer the information, the more effective the communication will be. And the more quickly you'll be able to deal with the issue and remedy it. Optimize your response and delivery. Ensure that you're doing a multimodal delivery, as we've talked about before, but also ensure that you understand specifically how to use the more secure channels to communicate confidential information versus just informational one. And then ultimately, proactively communicate with all stakeholders, including, when appropriate, employees, partners, and actual customers. Do it proactively and do it across multiple phases. And again, if you already have an Everbridge system, use it. Plan to use it for these sorts of attacks. Create your plans, your templates. If you've got the Incident Communications module, create the appropriate template, appropriate rules, and be ready for this. And if not, come and talk to us. So at this point, I'll turn it back to Sal for any questions that you may have. And please, again, go to the questions tab and type in your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ahmad. So, and thank you, Terry. So, as Ahmad mentioned, it's now we'll open up the audience for some live Q&A. As we do the Q&A, just want to let everyone know that we do have so Everbridge does have a white paper that addresses this topic: 5 steps to prepare your cyber attack communications and response plan. I have a shortened URL here. If you want to download that, we'll also send out this URL in our follow-up communications. Also, if you do want to request a demo of Everbridge, if you are interested in what our capabilities are in a communication of a situation just like this, we are happy to discuss this with you in a more private setting. So again, questions can be submitted through the GoToWebinar Q&A interface. First question that I did have, and I guess I'll address this to Terry to begin with, Terry, what resources are available once you become sort of a victim of a cyber attack? Where can you go to access resources?
As in from an external place, there's, excuse me, there's different companies like mine that specializes in incident threat response. So everyone's heard of Mandiant. They're a leader. They do an excellent job. There's other companies out there doing it. Some I would recommend. Second one, you want them right away. Another resource is law enforcement. And Carter, would you mind expanding on the law enforcement piece? Because I think that's critical as well.
Absolutely. So when we're talking about once a situation has occurred and who do you really look towards from a law enforcement perspective, with regards to like the companies that have incident response capabilities like a Mandiant or Terry, these are organizations that usually already have pre-existing relationships within the law enforcement community. The thing to keep in mind is that whether it's FBI, DHS, or whomever, they still have working requirements like any organization. And unfortunately, depending on what type of vertical you're in or what the type of estimated dollar threshold for damage is, it may not be as immediate of a response as you would like to have. We've heard throughout the course of this presentation how ultimately do you derive greater effectiveness and greater efficiencies when faced with such a type of crisis management. Getting ahead of that with being able to build relationships within your law enforcement community, local and federal, is critically important. If you're in a major city, whether it's Atlanta, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, these are all prime areas that have very large branch offices for both FBI and DHS. If you're a part of a Fortune 500 company, what type of reach out has anyone from your organization done to be able to have a working relationship with, let's say, the assigned section chief? Because it may sound trivial, but having those pre-existing relationships, one, helps the process expedite at an exponential rate. And second, by building up those specific relationships, you almost have, by default, higher levels of assurance that the communications, what will be disseminated, what will not be disseminated, you will have a favored position versus just a traditional cold call. The FBI has public-private partnerships like InfraGard. DHS has a similar program, but if you don't have access to these particular points of contact, or if you're not familiar with these types of programs, we can certainly facilitate that on your behalf.
The other part I would like to add to that is CEOs, you hear about these security conferences, McAfee's, Black Hat. I would recommend going to the conferences. You don't have to be a technology geek to understand what the keynote speakers are saying. And a lot of law enforcement higher up. One conference, Jim Christie, Director of CIA Cyber Intelligence, was there, and we got to meet him. You can meet them in this fashion and actually try to establish these relationships. I do know for a fact that the FBI is proactively doing it, but depending on your business and the nature you're doing, it may be DHS or something else. Another great resource is US CERT, and Carter and I can assist in facilitating any of that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I have a couple questions coming in, and they're kind of the same, so I'll just address them myself right now. So a lot of people are asking if this information will be available on demand. The answer to that is yes. We are recording today's session. We will also make the slides available. Both will be available on the Everbridge website. Give us maybe tomorrow, but more likely early next week, to process these and post them. We will then email the audience with the location of those resources. So it's good that everyone's engaged and wants a copy, so look for that probably early next week. I have a question here. How can we verify that our vendors are taking steps to prevent cyber attacks?
Okay, the way you need to do that is you've got to assess your vendors. So one of the things I found with healthcare, a lot of vendors will sell a product to a healthcare system, and they say, we're HIPAA certified. You don't have to worry about it. Or we're meaningful use certified. In actuality, that certification, the only thing it does, it says that they've passed the functionality, the EMR passed the functionality of the requirement for meaningful use and HIPAA. It doesn't actually justify security. So my recommendation is you conduct a security assessment. you ask them how they're storing their data, how they're doing their data in transit, and you need a qualified security professional to assess your vendors. Kurt and I provide services like that to our clients. Some clients do it in-house where we work with them to teach them, create a program for them so they can assess their vendors. But a vendor risk management plan is probably one of your most critical assets besides communication that Sal and Ahmad are presenting here, which I think is a fabulous solution. And the reason is because your vendors are your biggest threat, because they can be your biggest hole that you don't know what's going on. So my recommendation is you create a vendor risk management program. You can have inside or outside, but you must assess your vendors, have them fill out questionnaires, ask them the hard questions, make them provide details, sign an NDA. If they fight you on it, they don't want to tell you, you may want to ask yourself why. There's plenty of people out there who want to do business. So anyways, if Sal, you're going to provide Carter and I's information after this, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
So, and this is Ahmad from Everbridge, and I do have to say that as a vendor, right, in this particular case, we are often asked to provide the information that Terry just outlined. Do we like doing that? As a vendor, I'll say no, it's a lot of work, but do we do it? Yes. Hopefully nobody from Everbridge is actually listening to this because it might mean more work for them. But honestly, no kidding here, a lot of companies do ask us to provide the exact information that Terry's talking about, and we're certainly happy to do that.
Excellent. I have a question here, Terry, that I think you'll want to handle. Do you have any guidance on effective tabletop exercise scenarios?
Do them. One of the things I find with people and my clients and partners is the biggest thing is people set up tabletop exercises. And they set the process up to get certified, compliant, whatever they need for their business, and they don't do them. Or if they do them, it's not a real crisis. Law enforcement, when they practice a drill, or the military, when they practice a drill, they really practice a drill. They go through the steps. They treat it as this is a real incident and react. And the whole thing is you need to, when you're doing these tabletop exercises, the purpose of them is to find out, not that you just have a process in place, but how you're failing that process. How can you improve that process? What are my lessons learned? How quickly did we respond? Were we successful in contacting somebody? Purposely do it when people are on vacation or all kinds of things. Create different scenarios. I know, Carter, you have worked extensively with law enforcement and that type, and I've, of course, on the civilian world, worked with tabletop exercises. But the real key is you need to do them and find out what really does work and what doesn't work and create a real crisis.
And this is Carter, and if I can piggyback off of Terry's comments, and just don't limit it to the scope of your own organization. Just in a previous session, we're talking about what type of risks associated with third-party business associates. When you have contact, whether you're talking about cloud service providers or any type of managed services, are the numbers current? Are the emails current? Is even the original point of contact even still current? People change jobs. These are all things that should be taken into consideration because, again, it comes back to how much time are you going to be spent, or I should say will be spent, trying to rectify these gaps in knowledge versus having a more effective and more efficient process. And
remember, the more efficient your process, the better you are able to communicate and control that damage and to eliminate that threat and preserve the chain of evidence that you need to defend yourself from any kind of civil liabilities or criminal is your best bet. And the only way you can do that is you have to be prepared. And the only way I know of being prepared is you actually do the exercise. It's not just something that people kind of go through the motions. You need to do it, time it, find out where you're failing, create, mitigate, come up with another better way, better process. And Carter's absolutely unequivocally right. If you're using a lot of vendors, involve them. Vendors I find like vendors like Everbridge are more than cooperative, and Everbridge is one of the companies that are more than cooperative, even though I asked the very hard questions. So, but it's real critical.
Absolutely, thank you. So just a reminder to the audience, questions can be submitted through the GoToWebinar Q&A. We have a couple more minutes left. I'm going to try to get as many questions in as I can. This is probably a good one for Ahmad. What form of alternative communication is best after a breach is detected so as to keep the attackers out of said communications?
Well, that's a good question. So obviously, when we're talking about a completely alternate system that's redundant, it would be one that says separated from your system as possible. So certainly for all of you who are Everbridge customers, I would urge you to create the appropriate plans to use your Everbridge system in this particular case, because it's going to be outside of anything that you do. But as I mentioned before, also, you do need to optimize your response based on what's going on your delivery. So use your Everbridge system as a means to communicate with all the appropriate stakeholders as much as possible. It's a different system. It'll only be effective if you have the right data in there. But then, ask us a little bit later on maybe about our secure communications package across the board that allows for fully encrypted or end-to-end encrypted capabilities for peer-to-peer communications as opposed to just broadcasting capabilities, where everything that you do, whether it's sending texts or even your voice calls or your video calls, are fully encrypted and also are logged in such a way that if you do need to provide that chain of evidence that Terry mentioned, that you have all of the auditing capabilities across the board. So one thing that some of you have heard me say before when they asked me about what's the most resilient means of communication when you're doing multimodal, is my answer is always there isn't one, right? At any particular point in time, email can fail, landlines can get bogged down because of central offices, SMS can be delayed, obviously email can be compromised and never get there. The key here is to have a multimodal capability in order to increase your chances of communications actually getting through. And then when you absolutely positively need it to be secure, because that's how you're going to resolve the issue, then you move on to fully secure communications, which is certainly just one modality. But in the cases where there is critical information that you absolutely positively don't want anybody to be able to listen in on, that's what you actually use.
Great, great. So let's. I'm going to try to squeeze one more question in before the top of the hour. So Terry, I think this is an interesting question about kind of liability, and I think you'll have a lot to add here. So here's a question. We are an organization that holds sensitive client data for multiple clients. If we suffer a data breach where some but not all of our clients' data might have been compromised, are we obliged to notify all clients or just those whose data is at risk?
Okay, I'm going to qualify this that I'm not a licensed attorney in the state of California. However, legally, you're only required to notify for an actual breach or an actual compromise that you know that the data was compromised. So, but from a branding logistics perspective, I would notify all clients and I would customize a message that if you're not sure of who and the extent, customize a message that's going to reassure your clients. But if you tell part of your clients but you don't tell the rest of them, I guarantee they're going to talk. So from a strategic point of view, again, what both Ahmad reiterated and Carter is you've got to control the flow of communications, because this can damage you, your brand. And some companies can't recover from a big breach, but may have been able to had they not prepared for it, done what they need to do during the crisis and during the same time. So from a liability stance, legally, it's my understanding that you only, and it depends whether it's healthcare or what have you, but all of them, whether it's FTC, the security rules, or PCI.org, which is actual organization, but there's regulations under that as well. You are required to notify if there's a breach, and there's a certain time frame that you are required to notify within. But so let's say you've been attacked, but no data was stolen, and because you stopped them at the second layer of firewall, so they couldn't get to your database and they couldn't steal it, and you've confirmed that. Do you have to notify your clients? As far as I'm concerned, no. Nothing was stolen. If there's a breach and somebody got part of the information, I think the smart thing to do would be to notify all clients and then only notify individually the ones who are actually compromised, so they can take active measures to protect themselves, their identity.
Great advice. I think that's transparency is key. So I think that's fantastic advice. We're past the hour mark, so we were not able to get to all the questions. If we were not able to get to your questions, we will try to communicate back to you and get those answers to you after the webinar. So thank you for submitting them. But Terry, Carter, Ahmad, thank you so much for doing this. I think this was really informative, and by the volume of questions, I could tell that the audience was very engaged. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.